the idea of becoming intoxicated, would drink a few drops of it, but never more. Her strength returned. Autumn passed. Félicité began to reassure Madame Aubain, but one evening, when she returned home after an errand, she met Monsieur Poupard's coach in front of the door. Monsieur Poupard himself was standing in the vestibule, and Madame Aubain was tying the strings of her bonnet. "Give me my foot warmer, my purse, and my gloves, and be quick about it," she said. Virginia had congestion of the lungs. Perhaps it was desperate. "Not yet," said the physician, and both got into the carriage, while the snow fell in thick flakes. It was almost night and very cold. Félicité rushed to the church to light a candle. Then she ran after the coach, which she overtook after an hour's chase, sprang up behind and held on to the straps. But suddenly a thought crossed her mind. The yard had been left open. Supposing that burglars got in? And down she jumped. The next morning, at daybreak, she called at the doctor's. He'd been home, but had left again. Then she waited at the inn, thinking that strangers might bring her a letter. At last, at daylight, she took the diligence for Lisieux. The convent was at the end of a steep and narrow street. When she arrived about at the middle of it, she heard strange noises and a funeral knell. It must be for someone else, thought she, and she pulled the knocker violently. After several minutes had elapsed, she heard footsteps. The door was half opened, and a nun appeared. The good sister, with an air of compunction, told her that she had just passed away, and at the same time the tolling of St. Leonard's increased. Félicité reached the second floor. Already at the threshold she caught sight of Virginia lying on her back, with clasped hands, her mouth open and her head thrown back, beneath a black crucifix inclined toward her, and stiff curtains which were less white than her face. Madame Aubain lay at the foot of the couch, clasping it with her arms and uttering groans of agony. The Mother Superior was standing on the right side of the bed. The 3 candles on the bureau made red blurs, and the windows were dimmed by the fog outside. The nuns carried Madame Aubain from the room. For 2 nights, Félicité never left the corpse. She would repeat the same prayers, sprinkle holy water over the sheets, get up, come back to the bed and contemplate the body. At the end of the first vigil, she noticed that the face had taken on a yellow tinge. The lips grew blue, the nose grew pinched, the eyes were sunken. She kissed them several times, and would not have been greatly astonished had Virginia opened them. To souls like these, the supernatural is always quite simple. She washed her, wrapped her in a shroud, put her into the casket, laid a wreath of flowers on her head, and arranged her curls. They were blonde, and of an extraordinary length for her age. Félicité cut off a big lock, and put half of it into her bosom, resolving never to part with it. The body was taken to Pont-l'Évêque, according to Madame Aubain's wishes. She had followed the hearses in a closed carriage. After the ceremony, it took 3/4 of an hour to reach the cemetery. Paul, sobbing, headed the procession. Monsieur Bouret followed, and then came the principal inhabitants of the town, the women covered with black capes, and Félicité. The memory of her nephew, and the thought that she had not been able to render him these honours, made her doubly unhappy, and she felt as if he were being buried with Virginia. Madame Aubain's grief was uncontrollable. At first she rebelled against God, thinking that he was unjust to have taken away her child, she who had never done anything wrong, and whose conscience was so pure. But no, she ought to have taken her south. Other doctors would have saved her. She accused herself, prayed to be able to join her child, and cried in the midst of her dreams. Of the latter, one more especially haunted her. Her husband, dressed like a sailor, had come back from a long voyage, and with tears in his eyes told her that he had received the order to take Virginia away. Then they both consulted about a hiding place. Once she came in from the garden, all upset. A moment before, and she showed the place, the father and daughter had appeared to her, one after the other. They did nothing but look at her. During several months she remained inert in her room. Félicité scolded her gently. She must keep up for her son, and also for the other one, for her memory. "Her memory," replied Madame Aubain, as if she were just awakening. "Oh, yes, yes, you do not forget her." This was an allusion to the cemetery, where she had been expressly forbidden to go. But Félicité went there every day. At 4 o'clock exactly she would go through the town, climb the hill, open the gate, and arrive at Virginia's tomb. It was a small column of pink marble, with a flat stone at its base, and it was surrounded by a little plot enclosed by chains. The flower beds were bright with blossoms. Félicité watered their leaves, renewed the gravel, and knelt on the ground in order to till the earth properly. When Madame Aubain was able to visit the cemetery, she felt very much relieved and consoled. Years passed, all alike, and marked by no other events than the return of the great church holidays, Easter, Assumption, All Saints' Day. Household happenings constituted the only data to which in later years they often referred. Thus, in 1825, workmen painted the vestibule. In 1827, a portion of the roof almost killed a man by falling into the yard. In the summer of 1828, it was Madame's turn to offer the hallowed bread. At that time, Bourret disappeared mysteriously, and the old acquaintances, Guyot, Liébard, Madame Le Chaptois, Robelin, old Grémonville, paralysed since a long time, passed away one by one. One night, the driver of the mail in Pont-l'Évêque announced the Revolution of July. A few days afterward, a new sub-prefect was nominated, the Baron de Larsonnière, ex-consul in America, who, beside his wife, had his sister-in-law and her 3 grown daughters with him. They were often seen on their lawn, dressed in loose blouses, and they had a parrot and a Negro servant. Madame Aubain received a call, which she returned promptly. As soon as she caught sight of them, Félicité would run and notify her mistress. But only one thing was capable of arousing her: a letter from her son. He could not follow any profession, as he was absorbed in drinking. His mother paid his debts, and he made fresh ones, and the sighs that she heaved while she knitted at the window reached the ears of Félicité, who was spinning in the kitchen. They walked in the garden together, always speaking of Virginia, and asking each other if such and such a thing would have pleased her, and what she would probably have said on this or that occasion. All her little belongings were put away in a closet of the room which held the 2 little beds, but Madame Aubain looked them over as little as possible. One summer day, however, she resigned herself to the task, and when she opened the closet, the moths flew out. Virginia's frocks were hung under a shelf, where there were 3 dolls, some hoops, a doll's house, and a basin which she had used. Félicité and Madame Aubain also took out the skirts, the handkerchiefs, and the stockings, and spread them on the beds, before putting them away again. The sun fell on the piteous things, disclosing their spots, and the creases formed by the motions of the body. The atmosphere was warm and blue, and a blackbird trilled in the garden. Everything seemed to live in happiness. They found a little hat of soft brown plush, but it was entirely moth-eaten. Félicité asked for it. Their eyes met and filled with tears. At last the